They were convinced their tanks were invincible. The Type 95. Hago had proven itself against Chinese forces, against Soviet armor at Hulkingall, and in the sweeping victories across Malaya and the Philippines. Japanese tank crews believed their light tanks represented perfection. They saw the Hago as the pinnacle of armored warfare design, perfectly suited for the jungles and islands of the Pacific. They had crushed every enemy they encountered. They were wrong. The story of how they discovered this begins not with defeat, but with confidence born from years of success. The Hago was no accident of design. It was the product of careful military planning that began in 1933. That year, the Japanese Imperial Army recognized a critical gap in its armored forces. The Type 89 medium tank, Japan's workhorse, could only manage 15 mph. This was adequate for infantry support, but far too slow for modern mechanized warfare. Japanese planners had watched with interest as other nations developed faster, more mobile armored forces. They wanted a tank that could keep up with motorized infantry, move at 40 mph by truck, and navigate the rough terrain of Manchuria and China. They also needed a vehicle that Japan's industrial base could produce in quantity. The Army Technical Bureau issued specifications in July 1933. The new tank should weigh about 7 tons, mount a 37mm gun, reach 40 km/h, and resist rifle and machine gun fire. Most importantly, it had to be simple to manufacture and maintain. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries received the contract. Engineer Tomio Hara, already known for designing the Type 89, took on the challenge of creating Japan's next-generation light tank. His most notable innovation was the bell crank suspension system, a simple yet effective design that would become standard on Japanese tanks for the next decade. By June 1934, Mitsubishi had completed the first prototype of what would become the Type 95. The prototype impressed military observers during field trials in Manchuria and at proving grounds in Japan. It was fast, reaching 45 km/h on roads and maintaining 25 to 30 km/h cross-country. Its maneuverability astonished even experienced tank officers. The Hago's suspension, with its distinctive bell crank design, absorbed shocks well and allowed it to traverse terrain that would have stopped other vehicles. It was also mechanically reliable, powered by a Mitsubishi 6-cylinder air-cooled diesel engine. That engine produced 120 horsepower at 1/800 revolutions per minute. The diesel engine was a point of pride for Japanese engineers, making the tank less vulnerable to fire than gasoline-powered vehicles and better suited for Japan's resource conditions. Diesel fuel was also more available across Japan's empire, especially in regions like Manchuria and Southeast Asia, where gasoline was scarce. The engine could run for 8 to 10 hours on 34 gallons of fuel, giving the tank a range of roughly 130 miles on roads. Trials, however, revealed issues. The suspension had a tendency to pitch violently on rough ground, making aiming while moving nearly impossible and exhausting the crew. Engineers worked to address this by connecting bogie pairs with braces. The modification became known as the Manchurian suspension. It reduced, but didn't eliminate, the rough ride that would define the Hago's service life. In 1935, the Type 95 was presented to the Army Technical Bureau as Japan's next main light tank. The infantry representatives expressed concern. They argued that 12 mm of armor was far too thin for a tank meant to support infantry assaults against fortified positions. The cavalry officers countered that speed and mobility were more valuable than armor. After much debate, the infantry agreed to accept the design. The Type 95 Hago was officially adopted. The name came from the Japanese imperial calendar, marking the 2595th year since Japan's legendary founding. Production began at Mitsubishi in 1936. The Hago was a small tank, measuring 4.38 meters long, 2.06 meters wide, and 2.13 meters tall, about 14 feet long, 6 feet 9 inches wide, and just under 7 feet tall. A man of average height could easily look over the turret. It weighed about 7.4 tons empty, reaching 8.1 tons when fully loaded with crew, ammunition and fuel. Its armor was extremely thin by any standard, 12 meters at its thickest, 9 meters on the roof and floor, and as little as 6 meters in non-critical areas. Japanese designers believed this was enough to stop rifle and machine gun fire at combat range. They built the tank for the enemies they expected to face, Chinese infantry and light Soviet vehicles with limited anti-tank capabilities. Inside, the tank was cramped. The crew consisted of just 3 men. The driver sat front left with limited vision through a small viewport and periscope. The hull machine gunner sat beside him, operating a Type 97 7.7 meter machine gun. The commander occupied the turret alone, a nightmare job. He had to command the tank, direct the driver, load and fire the main gun, operate the turret machine gun, and communicate with other tanks, often without a radio, since only 1 in 4 had one. The main armament was a Type 94 30cm cannon, capable of firing both high-explosive and armor-piercing shells. The commander also manned a second machine gun mounted to the rear right of the turret, making his role physically exhausting and chaotic. American tankers who later examined captured Hagos marveled that anyone could fight effectively under such conditions. The Japanese commander had no seat, standing throughout combat, exposed if the hatch was open or blind if it was closed. The turret rotated by hand crank, requiring great effort. Space was so tight that even small movements were difficult. Yet, for the type of warfare Japan fought in China, the Hago performed admirably, proving both mobile and reliable.